I never thought I would live to see the day when my own daughter would look me in the eye, in front of hundreds of guests, and call me a selfish old man. The chandeliers sparkled above, violins played softly, and every seat was filled with people dressed in their finest suits and gowns, but all I could hear was her voice, sharp, cruel, and filled with disdain. "If you won't give me the beach house, then you're not welcome here. Leave." My hands trembled as I gripped the wooden cane that had supported me through all my lonely years, but in that moment, it wasn't my body that felt weak. It was my heart. Guests gasped. Some turned their eyes away. Others whispered as if I had committed some crime, and my daughter, my only child, stood there in her wedding dress, glowing with youth and beauty, yet uglier in spirit than I had ever imagined. She was supposed to be the little girl I raised with my own hands, the child I sacrificed everything for after her mother walked out. Instead, she was a stranger, one who valued bricks and walls more than the blood that ran in her veins. I turned toward the door, humiliated, abandoned in front of the very people I thought would become my family. But as I stepped out into the cold night air, one thought blazed inside me. She may have kicked me out of her wedding, but she would never forget what was coming next. I wasn't born into wealth or privilege. My hands tell the story of my life, calloused, scarred, veins raised like rivers from years of hard labor. I started working before I was even a man, hauling crates at the docks, fixing roofs, doing whatever I could to keep food on the table. Back then, all I dreamed about was building a family, a home filled with warmth, laughter, and the smell of bread in the oven. When Clara was born, I thought that dream had come true. She was so small, so fragile, and when I first held her in my arms, I swore I would never let her down. But life has a cruel way of testing promises. Her mother, my wife, decided she didn't want the burden of family anymore. Clara was only 7 when she packed her bags, leaving a note on the counter that said she needed freedom. I begged her to stay, not for me, but for the child who still needed bedtime stories and goodnight kisses. She walked out anyway. From that day on, I became mother, father, cook, and nurse, all rolled into one. Raising Clara alone was the hardest thing I've ever done. I remember coming home after 12-hour shifts, my back screaming, and still forcing a smile because she wanted me to braid her doll's hair or check the monster under her bed. There were nights when dinner was just a slice of bread and butter for me so that she could have the last piece of chicken. I never let her know the truth. She thought I had already eaten. Watching her chew happily, believing I was full too, gave me a strange comfort, even as my stomach growled. Money was always tight. Rent, school supplies, doctor's visits. It felt like life was constantly testing how much I could endure. There were months when I had to choose between paying the electric bill or buying her new shoes. I remember patching the same pair of sneakers 3 times until the soles were worn paper thin. But when I handed them back to she hugged me and said, "Thanks, Daddy. Now they're even better." That innocence kept me going. The beach house became my sanctuary. It wasn't much when I bought it, just an old shack, weather-beaten and sagging by the shore. But with my own 2 hands, I rebuilt it, board by board, beam by beam. I worked weekends fixing the roof, sanding the floors, painting the walls. Every nail I hammered felt like a promise to Clara, that she would have a safe place no one could ever take from her. She used to run barefoot through the halls while I painted, her giggles mixing with the crash of waves outside. "This is our castle, Daddy," she once said, and I smiled because to me it truly was. I wasn't a perfect father. I lost my temper sometimes. I forgot birthdays once or twice when I was working too hard, and I couldn't give her all the shiny toys other kids had. But I gave her my time, my strength, my very soul. When other fathers were sleeping, I was mending her school uniform by candlelight. When others were resting, I was working overtime so she wouldn't feel left out on field trips. I remember sitting in the back row of every school recital, still in my dusty work clothes, clapping the loudest, because seeing her on stage was the reward that made every sacrifice worth it. Loneliness was my constant shadow. I didn't date, I didn't remarry. My life was Clara, and I was content with that. The world could strip me of everything, but as long as I saw her smile, I felt rich. The beach house wasn't just a building, it was the story of our lives carved into wood and stone. The porch swing where she fell asleep in my lap during summer nights. The kitchen table where we shared soup on cold winters. The little marks on the wall where I measured her height year after year. It all carried the weight of my love. I believed foolishly that she carried those memories in her heart the same way I did. I believed that one day, when she had her own children, she would tell them, "Your grandpa built this with his hands, so we could have a home filled with love." That thought kept me going, even when my body ached, even when the world seemed cruel. I sacrificed everything so Clara would never feel abandoned the way her mother had abandoned us. I lived my life for her, poured every ounce of love I had into her. That was my purpose. That was my joy. And perhaps that's why the betrayal that came later cut so deep, because I thought she understood. I thought she saw me. I thought she loved me the way I loved her. It started with a question that felt harmless. "Dad, whose name is on the deed again?" I laughed, thinking she was just curious. "Mine, sweetheart. It'll be yours when I'm gone." She didn't smile. "Why not now?" I blinked. "Because I'm not gone." She sighed, looking away like I disappointed her over something trivial. "James says it's risky to wait." James came over one Sunday with a folder and a salesman's smile. "Mr. Turner," he said, sitting too straight at my kitchen table, "it's just a transfer. You still get to live here." I ran a finger over the grain in the wood, the table I built. "And if I say no?" He shrugged like it was a business hiccup. "Then Clara can't make long-term plans." I looked at my daughter, and she looked at the floor. "Is that true, Clara?" She nodded. "It's our future, Dad. You taught me to plan." At first I brushed it off as youthful impatience. Then came the comments from her bridesmaids, whispered like gossip, but meant for my ears. "Did you hear? Her dad's being stubborn about the house. Who fights their own daughter over a property?" I kept my back straight, heart beating like a drum in a quiet room. The rehearsal dinner felt like a trial. A cousin I hadn't seen in years slapped my back and said, "Come on, old man, hand over the keys already." Someone else chimed in, "A house for a wedding gift, how iconic." Clara looked at me, measuring my reaction like an investor sizing up a deal. I raised my glass and said, "To my daughter, may she never forget where she came from." She held her glass too, and replied flat, "I won't, if where I came from doesn't hold me back." Later, when we were alone in the hallway outside the reception room, she said it quietly. "Sign the transfer as your father of the bride gift." My breath caught. "A gift?" She folded her arms. "Yes, everyone knows you're doing it." "Everyone knows?" I whispered. "Since when did my home become a public promise?" I went home that night with a knot in my stomach. I sat in the dark living room, listening to the refrigerator hum and the waves beyond the window. Shock sat with me like a stranger. I stared at the porch swing, at the dent where her head used to rest when she'd fall asleep in my lap. I told myself she was stressed. I told myself she didn't mean it like that. I lied to myself because the truth hurt too much to hold. On the morning of the wedding, I put on my best suit. I polished the old watch my father gave me. I tucked a tiny locket into my pocket with her childhood photo inside. I told the mirror, "She's still your little girl." The mirror didn't argue, but it didn't agree either. At the venue, the coordinator glanced at her clipboard and hesitated. "Your seat has been moved, Mr. Turner." "Moved where?" "Back row," she said. "Bride and groom's request." I swallowed. "I'm the father of the bride." She looked away. "I'm just following orders." I found Clara in the bridal suite, surrounded by lace and makeup artists. She looked radiant, and my heart swelled despite everything. "Can I have a moment?" I asked. Everyone left, and it was just us, father and daughter. I held out the locket. For you, so you never forget our beginnings. She didn't take it. Did you bring the deed? My hand trembled. Clara. It's not complicated, Dad, she said, a hard edge in her voice. Sign it now. We'll announce it after the vows. Announce it? I repeated, stunned. As what? Some kind of prize? As love, she said. As proof you support us. I felt something inside me crumple like paper. I support you. I don't support being forced. She straightened, like she'd made a decision. If you won't do this, don't sit with family. I stared at her, trying to recognize the child I raised. Don't do this to me, I whispered. Not today. Then don't do this to me, she shot back. Don't be selfish. The ceremony began, and I walked the aisle alone to my back row seat. People glanced back, confused. James's parents sat up front like royalty. A bridesmaid leaned toward another and murmured, "He's making her prove herself." I felt heat rise in my face, shame sharpening into something else. After the vows, they took the microphones for speeches. James went first, all charm. Today is not just about love. It's about building a future, with generosity, with support. Clara took the mic next. Some gifts aren't wrapped in paper. Some are deeds. The room applauded, expectant, like a crowd at an auction. She looked at me directly. Dad? I stood slowly, heart pounding at my throat. She smiled, thin. Ready to show everyone your love? My mouth was dry. I love you, I said into the mic, voice shaking, but I won't be bullied into giving away my home. Gasps scattered like birds. James took the mic. He's joking, he said, chuckling. He promised us. I promised nothing, I said, louder now. I offered my blessing, not my house. The room turned. Someone booed. James's mother hissed, "Shameful." Clara's face hardened into something I'd never seen. "If you won't give us the beach house," she said, each word a hammer, "then you don't belong here." I felt the floor tilt. "What?" "Leave," she said. "Don't ruin my wedding." I looked around for a single friendly face and found none. "Clara," I whispered, "I raised you alone. I bled for you. Is this what I mean to you?" She stared through me. "Security." Two men approached politely, like I was a problem to be escorted away. I put my hands up. "No need," I said. "I know the way out." Someone clapped, one slow, sarcastic beat. I walked down the aisle I had dreamed of walking beside her, and every step hurt. Sadness washed over me first, a heavy, suffocating tide. In the lobby, I leaned against the wall and tried to breathe. Disbelief followed, sharp and cold. I pulled out the locket and wondered when love had become a transaction. I thought of bedtime stories, scraped knees, patched shoes, the sea air filling our lungs on summer mornings. None of it mattered here, not to her, not today. Anger came last, like a flame reluctant to catch and then roaring all at once. Anger at James, with his smirk and his spreadsheets. Anger at the whispers that turned my sacrifice into a punchline. Anger at myself for not seeing it sooner, for mistaking pressure for love. I walked out into the evening, the music still swelling behind me. On the curb, I looked back once at the glowing hall. I remembered the porch swing, the dent from her head. I remembered her tiny hand wrapped around my finger. And I understood something cruel and simple. They wanted the house more than they wanted me. I opened my car door with steady hands. Shock had passed. Sadness had emptied. Disbelief had burned away. Only anger remained, clean, focused, and quiet. As the engine turned over, I said it out loud, to no one and to myself. Enough. And the word tasted like truth. I sat in the driver's seat of my old car, the muffler rattling faintly under me, while the wedding music still floated through the hall's glowing windows. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles turned white, and yet I felt cold all over, like the blood had drained from my body. I stared at the locket still sitting in my pocket, the one I had meant to give her as a wedding gift. My thumb brushed over the tiny metal clasp, and I could almost see her at 8 years old, running barefoot on the beach, sand sticking to her knees, calling, "Daddy, look at me." I used to believe those memories were enough to protect us from the world. I used to believe love was stronger than greed. But as the laughter and applause erupted behind those walls, I realized she had chosen something else entirely. The humiliation clawed at me. My own daughter had cast me aside like I was nothing more than an obstacle, not her father, not the man who raised her through hunger and loneliness, but simply the old fool who stood between her and a piece of property. My chest tightened as if the weight of every sacrifice I ever made had suddenly been dropped on me again. Every meal I skipped so she could eat. Every double shift I pulled so she could have shoes on her feet. All of it twisted into bitterness now because it meant so little to her. Shock had kept me steady, during the ceremony. Sadness had choked me as I walked down the aisle alone. But now, sitting here in the dark, the sadness was drying into something harder. My grief was turning into clarity. I whispered into the silence, "You chose them over me, Clara. You chose bricks over blood." My voice cracked, but I didn't cry. I'd spent enough tears on people who didn't deserve them. For years I had told myself she would come around, that her sharp words were just the stress of youth, that her demands were born from excitement and planning. But tonight she showed me the truth, stripped bare for everyone to see. My daughter was not the child I once carried on my shoulders. She had become someone who could humiliate me in public, discard me like trash, and never blink twice. And if she could do that once, she would do it again, unless I stopped her. I leaned my head back against the seat and closed my eyes, hearing the ocean in the distance, the same waves that had rocked her to sleep as a child in our beach house. That house was never just lumber and stone. It was the story of my sacrifices. And now, it was the very thing she wanted to steal from me. I thought of James's smug grin, his hands already reaching for something that wasn't his. I thought of Clara's cold stare, her words echoing, "If you won't give us the beach house, you don't belong here." The shame stung like fire, but under that fire, something solid was forming, a resolve. I straightened in my seat and looked at my own reflection in the rearview mirror. My eyes were tired, lined with years of struggle, but behind them burned something sharp. I am not a weak man, I told myself. I am not a fool. I built everything with these hands, and I can damn well decide who deserves it. The grief that once drowned me now fueled me. I thought of every insult, every whisper, every look of pity from guests who believed I was the selfish father standing in the way of my daughter's happiness. Let them think that. Let them whisper. Because they would soon see the truth. I opened the locket and stared at her childhood face smiling back at me. For a moment, I almost faltered. For a moment, I wanted to believe my little girl was still there somewhere, that she could be saved from herself. But then, I remembered the venom in her voice when she called for security, when she told me to leave. That little girl was gone, and what stood in her place needed to learn a lesson. I tightened my fist around the locket until the metal dug into my palm. "Enough," I said aloud. The word didn't sound like despair anymore. It sounded like a promise. Enough of being humiliated. Enough of being treated like a burden. Enough of pretending blood ties excused betrayal. I took a deep breath, steadied my hands, and started the engine. The wedding was behind me now, but what came next? That was mine to control. If Clara wanted my house more than she wanted me, then I would make sure she never touched it. If James thought he could outsmart me, then he hadn't yet seen what patience and pain could create in a man like me. As I pulled onto the dark road, I made my vow, my voice cutting through the night. You wanted me gone, Clara. You pushed me out. But mark my words, you will never forget what comes next. You took my love for granted. Now you'll face my revenge. I didn't drive straight home. I drove to the water. I let the waves talk while I planned in silence. Revenge, I told myself, would not be noise. It would be paperwork, timing, and doors that closed softly, but forever. The first call I made wasn't to my daughter. It was to a lawyer I trusted, Ms. Patel. Her voice was calm, proud, precise. "Tell me everything." I did, and I didn't embellish. At the end, I said, "I want to make sure greedy hands never touch what I built." We started with the bones, the deed. "Put it in a trust," she suggested, "with a mission they can't challenge." I nodded into the phone. "Children, the ones who don't have a father to fight for them." We named it quietly, the Turner Tide Trust. I reserved a life estate for myself, my roof, my porch, my keys, until my last breath. Then we added teeth. A no-contest clause in my will. Anyone who challenges gets nothing. A reversion trigger. If anyone pressures me or sues, the trust accelerates and takes full title immediately. A recorded affidavit of intent. My words dated, witnessed, no gift promised. It felt like laying rebar before pouring concrete. I changed the locks, not out of fear, out of principle. New deadbolts, fresh keys, 2 sets only. One went to a safe deposit box at the bank. Marisol, the branch manager, an old friend, slid the box over and said, "You good?" "I will be," I told her. I called the county clerk's office. Mr. O'Rourke, retired but still consulting, met me for coffee. "Record everything," he said, tapping the table. "Paper beats rumor." We reviewed filings line by line, so clean even a shark would choke. By sunset, the title was a fortress. I kept my phone on silent and my face polite. When Clara texted, I answered with short, warm replies. "Resting today. Let's talk next week." Every soft message bought me another brick of time. At home, I made a list on a yellow pad. Call insurance. Add trust as additional insured. Set tax autopay. No lapses, no leverage. Update POA. Remove family. Add Ms. Patel as agent for property decisions. Schedule inspection. Document current condition. Date stamp photos on a thumb drive. Tuck the drive in the safe with the locket. I looped in a quiet ally, Father Miguel from the orphanage. No grand speech, just facts. "This place will be theirs one day," I said. His eyes watered, but he didn't hug me or thank me loudly. He simply nodded, understanding the value of silence. I called Eli, an honest contractor I'd used for years. "Need some work done?" he asked. "Not yet," I said. "Just estimates, dated, signed, windows, roof integrity, railing code, papers that would matter later." He emailed PDFs. I printed and filed them in a blue folder marked Winter. I planted small seeds where they'd grow slowly. A standing donation pledge to the beach cleanup crew. A letter to the Historical Society about the cottage's heritage. Not a designation yet, just interest. Interest has a way of turning into attention at the right moment. I wrote 2 letters, both sealed. One to Clara. Kind, direct, unmistakable. "I love you. I won't give you the house. Don't ask again." One to James. Factual, legal, unflinching. "Any entry without my consent is trespass. Any work without permits will be reported." I bought a simple camera for the porch. Motion alerts only, no drama. I wasn't waiting to catch them. I was preventing them from claiming confusion later. Evidence is a quiet ally that never raises its voice. I met with my neighbor, May, a retired court clerk who sees everything. We didn't gossip. I asked her to sign as a witness on one document. She read it, looked at me and said, "About time you looked out for yourself." Her signature looped like a ribbon, neat, permanent. I kept my routine unchanged. Early walks on the shore, coffee at the same counter stool, a book every night in the same chair. Predictability is camouflage. When Clara called to smooth things, I listened more than I spoke. "I just want to plan our future, Dad," she said. "I hope you do," I answered. "Plan it without my house." She laughed like I had told a joke I didn't understand. I let the silence make my point. Ms. Patel built the final layer, a letter of instruction to release if certain triggers occurred, an attempted unauthorized transfer, a lien filed by anyone but me, or a recorded permit on my parcel without my signature. If any of those hit, the trust would move from quiet to public. I visited the cottage like a caretaker visiting a chapel. I walked room to room with my notebook, not measurements, memories. Where she took her first beach nap, where I marked her third-grade height, where the winter wind whistled before I fixed the sash. I called a local reporter, no names, just a tip-line message. If you ever need a story about a humble cottage helping kids, call back. I left no address, only a number. Stories need time to ripen. I was patient. I gathered spare keys I'd given out over the years. Most people returned them with a smile. The one person who stalled, I canceled. Locks remember who respects them, so do fathers. I practiced what I would say if they showed up. Not speeches, boundaries. You're not welcome inside without an invitation. I won't discuss the house. Please leave. I bought a plain envelope and slid in one page, a short summary of the trust, the life estate, the triggers. I tucked it behind a book on the middle shelf. Not hidden from me, hidden from my temper. If I got angry, I'd hand them paper, not fire. On Sunday, I went to church for the first time in years, not for absolution, for quiet. I prayed without words, just breath. What I asked for wasn't victory, it was clarity. Clarity came on a Tuesday morning. A bridesmaid posted a photo from the wedding with a caption, "Some people just don't know how to support happiness." I didn't reply. I printed it and stapled it to my file. I met Father Miguel again, this time at the empty playground by the orphanage. "Does your board know?" I asked. "They don't need to until they need to," he said gently. We shook hands like men who shared an oath. No celebration, only readiness. At dusk, I stood in the doorway of the beach house, listening. Waves. Gulls. The familiar creak of the porch that I never fixed on purpose. I promised the house, "I'll protect you, and you'll protect the right people." I drafted a final email and saved it as a draft, not sent. Subject. Clarification. Body. To any interested party, no gift was promised. Any claims to the contrary are false. Ms. Patel had a copy and a schedule. If needed, it would send to family, vendors, and the venue in one click. Then I did the hardest part of any plan. I waited. I mowed the small patch of grass. I oiled the hinges. I lived. When the phone finally lit up with James's name, I let it go to voicemail. He sounded cheerful, entitled. "Let's meet Wednesday. We'll get the paperwork done fast." I smiled without humor and wrote one line in my notebook. Wednesday. Let him talk. I set one more piece on the board, a quiet inquiry to the zoning office about short-term rental restrictions. Nothing aggressive, pure curiosity, the kind that leaves a public record entry with a timestamp. Breadcrumbs matter. I sharpened my pencils, put the blue folder by the door, and laid out my old jacket. Not armor, memory. Every stitch reminded me why I was doing this. Not to hurt, to protect. The plan didn't feel like vengeance anymore. It felt like a father finally drawing a line in the sand. The tide would try to erase it. I would draw it again, as long as it took. What was I really planning? Not a scene, a lesson, not a spectacle. A verdict written in ink and filed where whispers can't reach. When I finally turned off the lamp that night, I knew two things. They would come. And when they did, they would meet a different man than the one they shoved out the door. Not louder, stronger. I rested my hand on the locket in the safe and whispered to the dark, "I loved you first. I'll protect what that love built." Then to the waves outside, a final promise, steady, unshakable. "You wanted my silence. You'll get my decision instead." and beneath that, like bedrock, a vow I would not break. I remember the night before her honeymoon like it was yesterday. The way the ocean roared outside my window while I sat in the dim light, rehearsing every move I had been preparing in silence. They thought they had won, that by humiliating me at her wedding and snatching at the beach house, I was beaten into submission. But revenge is not loud at first. It's quiet, patient, and precise. When I finally set it in motion, it was a storm that no one saw coming. The first step was paperwork. I had made sure months ago that the house, while in my name, was tied into a trust I created after her mother passed. That trust gave me control over its use, its future, and its inheritance. My daughter believed the house would eventually become hers. That was her arrogance. She never expected that I'd already locked it beyond her reach. I called my lawyer and whispered into the phone, "It's time." Within 48 hours, every legal loophole was tightened, and the beach house was transferred into a charitable foundation I'd quietly set up under her nose. The house was no longer a family inheritance. It was now a retreat for veterans and struggling families, a living reminder that it would never belong to her. The second step was more personal. I knew she and her husband planned a lavish honeymoon abroad, paid for by the very money I had loaned her during her college years, money she promised to repay, but never did. What she didn't know was that I had quietly traced every credit line she had begged me to co-sign. I left them open, but in my name. While she flaunted her wedding dress, I had frozen the accounts. On the second day of their honeymoon, I got a text. "Dad, what happened? My card isn't working." I didn't reply. By the third day, I knew they were stranded overseas, forced to scrape by without their endless luxury. For the first time, they had to feel what I had felt, abandoned, powerless, desperate. But revenge is sweeter when shared. Remembering the family and friends who watched me being kicked out of that wedding hall, humiliated like some beggar, I made sure they all knew the truth. Quietly, I sent out copies of the foundation papers, proving the house was never hers to take. I attached a short note. She thought she could trade her father's dignity for a house. She ended up with nothing. The whispers spread faster than wildfire. The perfect bride was suddenly a spoiled thief in the eyes of her new in-laws. The third step was the masterpiece. I knew her husband's family prided themselves on wealth and reputation. They had mocked me at the wedding, sneering at my worn suit, my plain shoes, my lack of grandeur. But I had something they didn't, the truth about their precious son. Weeks earlier, I had hired someone to quietly dig through his business dealings. What I found was gold, shady investments, unpaid taxes, deals hidden from the IRS. At the right moment, I dropped an anonymous envelope at their doorstep, filled with copies of evidence. The fallout was brutal. Within days, his family distanced themselves from him, cutting ties, and my daughter realized she hadn't married into riches. She had married into ruin. The final twist came when she returned home, broken, her pride shattered. She showed up at the beach house, tears streaking her face, begging me to let her in. But the locks had been changed, and the sign out front now read, "Hope Haven, a sanctuary for those who served." She stared at it in disbelief, whispering, "Dad, what did you do?" I stepped out from the porch, arms crossed, voice steady. "You kicked me out of your life for these walls. Now these walls will never belong to you." The neighbors gathered, watching, some even clapping softly. The shame on her face was everything she had once forced onto me, and more. She tried to lash out, to scream, "You ruined my life," but I only shook my head. "No, daughter, you ruined it yourself when you forgot who raised you. I only reminded you of the cost." I turned my back as she sobbed, her new husband glaring in silence, powerless, exposed, defeated. For the first time I felt no pain, no regret, only justice. My revenge had not only stripped them of greed, but had lifted me out of the shadow of betrayal. And as I closed the door behind me, I whispered to myself, steady and calm, "This is what happens when a father's love is trampled. He becomes something stronger than forgiveness. He becomes unforgettable." When the dust of revenge finally settled, I found myself standing alone on the deck of my beach house, watching the waves crash against the shore as though they carried away years of bitterness with each retreat. The silence was heavy, but it wasn't empty. It was full of truth, full of the echoes of everything that had just unfolded. My daughter, the very child I once cradled in my arms, had tried to humiliate me, discard me like I was nothing but a stepping stone to her comfort. But she hadn't expected me to reclaim my dignity, to show her that love abused turns into something stronger than vengeance. It becomes justice. The wedding that was supposed to be her triumph had ended in scandal, whispers, and shattered pride, while I walked away with my head high. For the first time in years, I felt in control of my own story. But peace didn't come easy. That night, when I lay in bed, I thought about her face when the truth was revealed, how anger twisted into shame, how arrogance collapsed into disbelief. I didn't feel joy in her pain. Instead, I felt sorrow for what she had chosen to become. It hurt, knowing that I gave her everything: a father's sacrifices, sleepless nights, extra shifts, and the dreams I put on hold so she could chase hers, only for her to sell her soul to greed. I realized then that revenge doesn't erase wounds, it simply reminds you why they exist. Still, I couldn't deny the justice of it. She had tried to take my home, the one place where I had poured my blood, sweat, and soul, the place that represented survival, resilience, and memory. And when she demanded it like it was hers by right, I knew she had to learn that love is not ownership, and respect is not optional. By exposing her greed publicly, I had drawn a line in the sand, a line that told the world, and her, that even a father's love has limits when it is abused. In the weeks that followed, some family members whispered against me, saying I was too harsh. Others stood quietly by, ashamed they hadn't spoken sooner. Neighbors and old friends sent letters of support, saying they admired my courage. But through it all, I understood something bigger. Sometimes doing the right thing means standing alone. I didn't punish my daughter out of cruelty. I punished her because she had to face the consequences of her choices. And consequences are the most powerful teachers life has. One evening, I walked along the beach with my cane, letting the ocean breeze sting my face. Children were playing in the sand, and I caught myself remembering when my daughter was that age, when she'd run to me, calling Daddy, with pure joy in her voice. Those memories are bittersweet now, but they also remind me that love existed once, before greed poisoned it, that love is what made the betrayal cut so deep, and yet it's also what gave me the strength to survive it. I don't know if she will ever come back to me, humbled and remorseful. Maybe she never will. Maybe the damage is too great. But that is her burden to carry now, not mine. My burden ended the moment I chose dignity over submission, truth over silence. I may be an old man, but I walked out of that wedding hall with something my daughter never expected me to have: freedom. As for the beach house, it remains mine, not just as property, but as a symbol of resilience, of refusing to let anyone, even my own flesh and blood, take away the last piece of myself. It stands as a reminder that sacrifices are sacred, and they cannot be trampled without consequence. And so, the moral of my story is this: love your children, yes, but never let love blind you to disrespect. Giving everything without teaching gratitude creates entitlement, not loyalty. A parent's sacrifices should be honored, not exploited. And when the people closest to you betray you, remember this: your worth does not depend on their validation. Sometimes the greatest act of love for yourself is saying enough and standing firm, no matter who you're standing against. Because respect is not inherited, it is earned, and when it is denied, justice must follow.